My name is Michael Rowen. I'm the founder and owner of Rowen Furnishings, a furniture manufacturing company based in Austin, Texas. If someone asked how long I've been doing this, I'd probably say, my entire life. I started with a tiny woodworking shop, a few old machines, and a pair of calloused hands. Today, my company employs more than 100 people, runs 3 showrooms across the state, and supplies furniture for major interior design projects. I used to think that was the summit, that I had built the life I always dreamed of. But there's something no one warns you about. What you build with wood, steel, or sweat can still collapse with a single lie. I once believed I had control over everything: my work, my finances, my future, even the happiness inside my home. I thought that if I worked hard enough, stayed honest, and loved deeply, everything would hold firm. I was wrong. The story I'm about to share isn't about business, nor is it a lesson in success. It's a confession from a man who lost everything he thought was unshakable, not in the boardroom, but at home. I'm not telling it to seek pity, but because I know somewhere out there, someone might need to hear this. Maybe as a warning, maybe as comfort, or simply to know they're not alone in the pain of betrayal. If you're watching this video, drop a like. Not because I need it, but because every like feels like a quiet nod of understanding. My story began on a cold Sunday evening, a family dinner that seemed ordinary, but became the start of a storm I never saw coming. I can still picture those Sunday evenings in our house on the north side of Austin. To me, they were sacred. No contracts, no clients, no business calls allowed. Just family, Clara's cooking, and the laughter of our children. Clara, my wife, wasn't just a woman with impeccable taste. She was a refined cook. She could turn a simple meal into a celebration. Her signature dish was honey-roasted chicken with rosemary, served with mashed potatoes and a fresh garden salad. I used to joke that the moment that aroma drifted from the kitchen, I knew it was Sunday. After dinner, I'd pour myself a glass of Kentucky bourbon, play a little jazz, while Clara and our daughter Rachel tidied up. Rachel was her mother's reflection, quick, creative, and sharp-eyed. After graduating in marketing, she joined my company to handle branding and communication. My son, Ethan, was studying engineering at the University of Texas. He was more like me, quiet, pragmatic, and sometimes stubborn to a fault. Those evenings around the dinner table were our family's anchor, a time to share everything from school gossip to business updates and weekend plans. None of us realized that those peaceful dinners were the last traces of a complete family we would ever have. That particular Sunday, Clara seemed different. She wore a light blue dress I'd never seen before, her hair loosely curled, her makeup more polished than usual. When I asked, she smiled and said, "Can't I look nice once in a while?" Her tone was playful, but something in her eyes, bright yet distant, made my chest tighten. As dessert was served, Clara placed her hand on the table, took a deep breath, and said, "There's something I need to tell you all." Rachel and Ethan instantly stopped eating, and for some reason my heart started pounding, as if warning me of something unseen. Clara looked around the table, then met my gaze. "I'm pregnant, Michael. We're going to have another baby." In that instant, time froze. My children burst with joy, cheering and hugging their mother, while I smiled, stood up, and embraced her. But that smile was a lie, because inside a single question echoed in my mind. How could it be, when we haven't touched each other in 2 years? That evening, after dinner, Rachel and Ethan were still laughing. Rachel hugged her mother tightly, her eyes sparkling. "I've always wanted a little sibling. It'll make the house feel alive again." Ethan grinned. "I'll teach the kid how to play soccer, Dad. You can rest easy." I watched them, feeling like I was outside looking in. I smiled. I said all the right words of joy and congratulations, But inside, every laugh from my children felt like a knife turning in my chest. I couldn't comprehend how something impossible was unfolding right in front of me. I looked at Clara. She glowed with happiness. Her eyes lit up every time she mentioned the baby. Part of me wanted to believe her, to convince myself that my doubts were just paranoia. But reason wouldn't let me. Because I knew, better than anyone, that we had lived like strangers for 2 long years. Ever since that argument about the company's finances, Clara had moved to her own room, saying I needed to rest, that my snoring kept her awake. Slowly, quietly, we drifted apart. No fights, no shouting, just a slow cooling of something that once burned warm. When your kids grow up and your work consumes you, it's easy to think marriage only needs responsibility to survive. But I learned the hard way. When love fades, the emptiness will always find a way to fill itself, with silence, fatigue, or someone else. That night, when everyone went to bed, I lay in my room staring at the ceiling. I could hear Clara's faint laughter through the thin wall, then the sound of water running, and then nothing. My mind spun with questions. If it's not mine, then whose is it? How long has she been lying to me? And how blind have I been not to see it? I remember standing up, walking to my desk, and pulling out an old leather notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "The day I began to search for the truth." I didn't know when or how, but I knew one thing for certain. I would not let this lie bury me. As I sat quietly in my room that night, my mind drifted back to my childhood, to where everything began. Maybe, to understand why I reacted the way I did to betrayal, you need to know how I was raised. I was born and raised in the southern outskirts of Austin, in a small neighborhood filled with sawdust and the hum of table saws. My father, Frank Rowen, was an ordinary carpenter, but his pride was bigger than our entire house. He woke before dawn, sipped his strong black coffee, and worked until the last light of day faded. "You can't control luck," he used to say, "but you can always control how hard you work." My mother, Margaret, was gentle, keeping our home filled with the scent of warm bread and fresh pine wood. Every morning, when I heard the sound of her kneading dough and smelled coffee drifting through the kitchen, I knew another workday had begun, not just for my father, but for all of us. By the age of 12, I was already in the workshop with my dad. At first, just picking up nails and sweeping sawdust, then sanding, cutting, and eventually building my first chair. My father never yelled, but his gaze was so firm it didn't need words. I learned early that in carpentry, a single millimeter of error can ruin the entire piece. And in life, honesty works the same way. Bend it even a little, and everything can fall apart. We weren't wealthy. Our small wooden house creaked in the wind, and rain drummed on the tin roof like a restless heart. Yet I never once heard my father complain. He just worked, repaired, and taught me that the most valuable thing a man can own is his honor. I wasn't the best student, but numbers came easy to me, maybe because I helped Dad with the accounts. While my friends dreamed of being doctors or engineers, I dreamed of owning my own woodshop. I loved the rhythm of measuring, cutting, and joining pieces until they became something alive. Maybe that's why I never feared starting over, even when everything fell apart. I'll never forget the year I turned 16. A massive storm hit Austin, rain for 3 straight days, flooding the entire block. Our shop was underwater, nearly destroyed. I saw my father sitting on the front steps, his hands cracked and raw, staring at the soaked wood in silence. It was the first time I ever saw him cry. "People can lose everything, Michael," he said softly, "but as long as you have your hands and your will, you can rebuild." And we did. One plank at a time, one nail at a time, sweat mixing with dust. From that moment, I learned that life can knock you down 1,000 times, but it's your will that decides whether you stay there. The years passed, marked by the buzz of saws and the smell of varnish. When I was old enough, I studied accounting at night, worked in the shop by day, saving every penny to one day open my own business. I never dreamed of fame or wealth, just a simple goal, to live by my own work and see what I built endure. After high school, I didn't go straight to college. My father wanted me to, but I had other plans. I wanted to work, to earn enough to start my own workshop. We eventually compromised. I'd work as a carpenter during the day and study accounting at night. I wanted to understand how money worked, because I knew that if I could only build but not manage, my dream shop would never grow. At that time, I worked for a small woodworking company in town. The job was hard and dusty, but I felt I was inching closer to my dream. I got used to coming home late, covered in sawdust, but light in spirit. I knew I was on the right path. Then one day, fate intervened. Like most mothers, mine worried I was too obsessed with work. She insisted I go with her to the fall art fair downtown, just to breathe some fresh air. I went reluctantly, just to make her happy. I never imagined that among hundreds of colorful booths, I would meet Clara Benson, the woman who would change the course of my life. Clara stood at a small booth selling home decor pieces she had designed herself. Wooden picture frames painted in soft tones, ceramic vases, candles, and lace fabrics, all arranged so beautifully that I stopped in my tracks. But what truly held me there wasn't her products. It was her smile, gentle, bright, and genuine. I remember lingering longer than I should have, pretending to browse, just to hear her voice as she spoke with customers. When it was my turn, I blurted out, "You made all of these yourself?" Clara smiled. "Yes, I design and craft each one. What about you? Are you in the trades too?" I nodded. "Woodwork. Looks like we use the same material, just to tell different stories." She laughed, and that laugh, I carried it with me the rest of the afternoon. We talked for quite a while, long enough that my mother had to come find me. Before I left, I bought a picture frame, the first thing I ever bought, not because I needed it, but because I wanted to remember the person who made it. On the receipt, Clara scribbled a note. "Thank you, the woodworker who talks about stories behind materials." A week later, I went back to the fair just to see her, but her booth was gone. I thought that was the end of it. But fate doesn't like endings. 3 months later, at a design seminar I attended, she walked in. She recognized me immediately. From that moment, everything unfolded naturally, as if written somewhere long before. We dated, spending hours talking about work, art, and dreams. She was creative, I was practical. Two pieces that fit perfectly together. A year later, we got married in a small wooden chapel by the lake. My father cried, and my mother said I had made the right choice. The first years of marriage were both exhausting and joyful. We rented a small apartment, worked tirelessly. Clara taught interior design part-time, while I saved every dollar to open my own workshop. She helped with paperwork and bookkeeping, and it was she who suggested, "If your clients are already buying your tables and chairs, why not sell lamps, curtains, and decor too? They need a whole space, not just one item." That idea changed everything. From a tiny workshop, Rowen Furnishings was born, not just a furniture shop, but a creator of living spaces. And beside me, Clara was my greatest source of inspiration. Back then, I believed I had found the most precious thing life could offer. The following years were what I like to call the golden era, when everything seemed within reach. Rowen Furnishings thrived like never before. From a small workshop, we expanded into a showroom, hired our own design team, and signed deals with major distributors across the state. I worked endlessly, from dawn till dusk, but deep down I felt content, because I believed I was building something solid, a future for myself, for Clara, and for our children. At that time, Clara wasn't just my wife, she was my most trusted partner. She handled design and creative direction, while I took care of production and finance. We were a team, perfectly balanced. People admired us. When the press featured Rowen Furnishings, they called us Austin's golden couple of furniture design. I was proud. I thought, my life is complete. When Rachel was born, that happiness multiplied. Clara took a break from work to raise her. She devoted herself entirely to the baby, while I grew busier than ever. I still remember coming home late, quietly opening the door so I wouldn't wake them. I'd find Clara sitting under the warm yellow light, nursing our daughter, her hair messy, her eyes tired. But her smile, oh, that smile, made every sacrifice worth it. 3 years later, Ethan arrived. Our small home felt crowded, but full of laughter. We decided to buy a plot of land in the suburbs and build our first house. I designed every room myself, the wood type, the paint, the layout. Clara joked, "It's handy being married to a furniture guy. We're saving a fortune." I laughed, not knowing that the very house I poured my soul into would one day become a place filled with silence and suspicion. As the kids grew, Clara returned to work part-time as an interior designer. She made new connections, architects, clients, high-end decorators. She started paying more attention to her appearance, her clothes, her image. I didn't see it as a problem. In fact, I was happy to see her confident again. But sometimes, when I looked into her eyes, I realized something had shifted. That familiar warmth wasn't always there. We started to argue, not loudly, just quiet, cold disagreements. Clara said I was working too much, that I was putting the business above the family. I argued, everything I do is for you, for the kids. Don't you want a better life? She replied softly, I just want you home more often. Money without you doesn't mean much. I heard her, but I didn't really listen. I thought things would fix themselves. I believed that if I just kept working hard, everything would fall back into place. But in reality, the distance between us was growing bit by bit, like a hairline crack in wood, invisible at first, until one day the whole plank splits in two. If there was ever a moment I should have stopped, looked at my wife, and asked what was truly wrong, that was it. But I didn't. I was too busy building a company to realize that my own home was already crumbling. As time went on, work consumed me, and Clara seemed to drift further away. At first, I thought it was just a natural phase, a woman in her 40s wanting to reinvent herself, to find new meaning. I never realized that it was the first sign of something much darker. It all started with small things. Clara began going out more often, especially on Tuesday evenings. She said she'd enrolled in a pottery class downtown, something she'd always wanted to try. It made sense. She loved art, taught interior design, and I was happy she found something that brought her joy. I didn't question it. Until one day at the grocery store, I ran into Mrs. Louise, our longtime neighbor. She smiled and said, "What a surprise to see you here, Michael. Clara told me you always work late on Tuesdays, so she usually goes to class with a coworker. I even offered her a ride once, but she said someone was already picking her up." I smiled back politely, but inside a small alarm went off. Since when had I stopped knowing my wife's exact routine? That night I came home earlier than usual. The house was empty. I texted Clara, and she replied that she was heading home from class. When she arrived, she carried a few shopping bags, explaining she had bought extra supplies for her art course. I smiled and said nothing. Later, I opened an old leather notebook, one I'd once used to track company expenses, and wrote a single line. Tuesday, 8:45 p.m. Clara says pottery class. No online record of such course. From then on, I started paying closer attention. Not spying, just noticing. When she left, when she came home, her tone, her eyes, her messages. Her phone suddenly had a passcode. When I asked, she laughed. "My students keep borrowing it for games, you know how they are." But I knew. Clara had never needed a password before. On those nights, as she slept beside me, I looked at her and felt as if I were staring at a stranger. Peaceful, beautiful, but distant, a world away. We spoke less, and when we did, it was only about work, the kids, or chores. The warmth that once wrapped our marriage had faded, like an old photograph, still visible, but without life. One evening, as Clara packed her things for another class, I asked casually, "How long does this pottery course last?" She hesitated for a second, then replied, "A few more months, I guess. Why?" I smiled. "No reason, just curious." But even I could feel it. That smile no longer belonged to a trusting man. I began writing more often, dates, times, her explanations, my reactions. What began as short notes turned into full pages. That notebook slowly became a diary of suspicion, and with every line I wrote, I took one more step toward the truth, though my heart wasn't yet ready to face it. I used to think that nothing hurt more than losing trust. But the truth is, what hurts most is watching trust die slowly, piece by piece, while you still try to keep it alive. One afternoon in late April, I was working in my office when Rachel, my eldest daughter, walked in. Her face looked troubled, not fearful, but hesitant, as if carrying a weight she didn't know how to bear. "Dad," she said softly, I'm not sure if I should tell you this." I looked up. "What is it, honey?" Rachel hesitated, then spoke. "Yesterday, I left the office early to deliver a design draft to a client. On my way through downtown, I saw Mom. She wasn't with her friend. She was with Mr. Andrew, the company's accountant." My heart clenched. Andrew, the head accountant I trusted most, the man I considered family. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you sure, Rachel? Maybe they ran into each other by chance?" "No, Dad." She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I saw them at a cafe near the Riverside Hotel. Mom was laughing, the way she used to laugh with you when I was little. Then they walked together toward the parking lot. I didn't take any pictures. I just didn't know what to do anymore." I went silent. A long, heavy pause swallowed the air in the room. Rachel sat still, staring at the desk, while I could only hear the ticking of the clock and the rain starting to fall outside. "You did the right thing, sweetheart," I finally said, my voice rough. "But don't tell anyone else, not even your brother. Do you understand?" Rachel nodded, eyes red. "I understand, Dad." After she left, I sat alone for a long time. What used to be suspicion now had a face, a shape. It was no longer imagination. It was a sharp fragment of truth lodged deep in my chest. That evening, Clara came home as usual. She smiled, chatted, told stories about her class, and asked about the company's expansion plans. Everything looked normal, terrifyingly normal. I watched her closely, searching for a trace of sincerity in her eyes. But all I saw was a smooth, impenetrable shine, nothing to hold on to. That night I opened my notebook again. For the first time, I didn't just write the date and time. I wrote a name. Andrew Collins, Chief Accountant, met Clara at Riverside Cafe, 4:10 p.m., Wednesday. As the ink dried, I knew something fundamental had shifted. From that moment on, I was no longer a husband with doubts. I had become a man in search of the truth. After Rachel told me what she saw, I couldn't sleep for nights. I'd lie there in the dark, listening to the ticking clock, and one name echoed in my mind: Andrew Collins. I kept telling myself that maybe Rachel had been mistaken, that it was just work between them. But the more I tried to believe that, the clearer it became. Deep down, I already knew the truth. A week later, I met with Mark Jensen, an old friend who had once worked in private security. I knew I was crossing a line, stepping into a place where trust no longer existed, where only the bare, brutal truth lived. "I need you to look into my wife," I said flatly, "and into Andrew Collins, my head accountant. I want to know everything: where they meet, when, how often." Mark studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll keep this completely confidential. But Michael, are you sure you want to know? Because once you do, you'll never unsee it." I replied quietly, "I've lost too many nights to not knowing. Not knowing is worse." The following weeks were long and heavy, heavier than any Austin rain season I'd ever known. I kept working, managing meetings, smiling when needed, but inside me was a hollow silence. At the end of the month, Mark delivered the first report. I remember opening the file with shaking hands. Inside were photographs, receipts, and a detailed timeline. Tuesday, 5:10 p.m. Clara leaves her class early. 5:45, meets Andrew at a cafe near the Riverside Hotel. 6:20, they leave separately, each in their own car. 6:40, both appear on the hotel parking camera. 8:55, they exit the hotel and drive away in opposite directions. I stared at the dates, the times, the grainy photos, and my chest felt empty. There was no explosion, no rage, only a suffocating silence. I read through every page, marked every detail, noted every entry. Then I closed the folder, took a deep breath, and understood one thing. It was over. That night, when Clara came home, I looked at her and saw a stranger wearing my wife's face. She talked about a new project, about potential clients, and asked me, "Are you okay? You look tired." I smiled faintly. "Just work." She smiled back and placed her hand on my shoulder. The same hand that once brought me peace now only left me hollow. Later that night, I opened my notebook again. This time, my hand didn't shake. I wrote, short and merciless, "The truth is clear. Everything I built, everything I trusted, has been betrayed." I don't know how long I sat there, but when the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, I was still in the same chair, calm, too calm. There were no tears left, no anger, only one question echoing endlessly in my head. Why? When the truth finally stands in front of you, you only have two choices: pretend you don't see it, or face it. I've never been one to run away. I built my life from nothing, not to bow down to lies. But I also knew that truth can cut both ways. If I wasn't careful, it would wound the people I loved, especially Rachel and Ethan. I had to act, but with clarity. I didn't want to turn this pain into a public spectacle or a cheap tragedy. I wanted to return the truth, not with shouting, but with proof. I met with Mark again and said, "We need more data. I want everything documented, clearly, legally, undeniably." He nodded. "I'll install a tracker on the car and collect visuals. If they keep meeting, we'll have enough evidence." "Not enough," I said quietly. "We need more than enough." The following weeks moved slowly, like cold molasses. I lived two lives. By day, the busy businessman. By night, the man assembling fragments of truth. Clara suspected nothing. She still smiled, still asked about work, still played her part as if nothing had changed. Sometimes I looked at her and wondered, how can someone lie so calmly, with eyes that used to hold so much light? I once thought I knew her better than anyone. Turns out I only knew who she used to be, not who she'd become. 4 weeks later, Mark handed me the final folder. Photos, receipts, written confirmations. Everything matched what I'd feared. The affair between Clara and Andrew wasn't a fleeting mistake. It had been going on for over a year. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had lived 2 lives under the same roof. I read every page, then said to Mark, "Thank you. From here on, I'll handle it myself." He looked at me as if he wanted to speak, but didn't. Maybe he understood. Some wars can only be fought alone. That night I sat in my study, staring at the photos on my desk, Clara, Andrew, the nights they met, her smile as she looked at him. There was no rage left, only emptiness and a growing sense of resolve. I opened my notebook, the one that had held the story of my trust, then my suspicion, and now my truth. I turned to a new page and wrote, Plan, confrontation, no accusations, no shouting, just truth. Objective, preserve dignity, protect my children, give no room for lies to breathe. And below that, I added one final line, almost a vow. The day I reveal the truth will be the last day Clara ever looks at me as her husband. I chose a Friday evening. Light rain fell, the wind from the lake cool and quiet. The kids were out at their friends' homes, and it was just the two of us, in a house that had once been filled with laughter, now echoing only with the ticking of a clock. Clara was in the kitchen, rearranging design drafts. When I walked in, she looked up and smiled. "You're home early tonight." "I wanted to talk," I said, calm but firm. She paused, puzzled. "About what?" "About everything," I replied. "We need to talk about the truth." She frowned slightly, setting the papers down. "What truth, Michael?" I met her eyes. "About you, about me, and about a man named Andrew Collins." The air turned heavy. Even the rain seemed to hush. Her face paled for a moment, but she recovered quickly. "What are you talking about? Andrew's just a coworker. We only—" "Work together at the Riverside Hotel every Tuesday?" I interrupted, my tone low but cutting. "Or maybe at the cafe nearby before checking into a room together?" She stepped back slightly, her lips trembling. You followed me?" "No," I said. "I simply recorded what you left behind." I placed the folder on the table. Photos, receipts, times, places. Everything laid out, undeniable. She stared at them, eyes filling with tears. "You don't understand, Michael." I cut her off gently. "No, Clara. I understand better than you think. I understand what it feels like to be lied to by the person whose eyes once held nothing but truth." Her tears fell freely. "I didn't mean to. It was a mistake. I don't even know how it happened." I looked at her for a long time before replying. "I spent my life building everything, with my hands, my heart, my faith. And you, the one I trusted most, were the one who tore it down. I don't need your apology. I just needed the truth." She lowered her head, voice breaking. "I was wrong. Andrew said things you stopped saying. You were always busy, distant. I felt invisible. And then, things went too far." I closed my eyes for a moment. Not from pain, from exhaustion. "Maybe I failed somewhere," I said quietly. "I'm not perfect, but betrayal is never the answer." She sobbed harder as I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the rain grew heavier. "I won't make this public, but from now on, we are no longer husband and wife. I'll take care of Rachel and Ethan. You can keep the house until everything is settled." She looked at me, pleading. "Michael, please, don't do this. Don't make the kids—" "I'm not doing anything," I interrupted softly. "You made this choice." I picked up my coat and walked to the door. Her voice trembled behind me. "Do you still love me?" I stopped. I didn't turn around. My voice came out low, almost a whisper. "I love the woman you used to be, but she's gone now." And I stepped outside, letting the door close behind me, along with all the years that no longer existed. When the door closed behind me, I didn't look back. The rain fell harder, pouring down as if the sky itself wanted to wash everything clean. I walked down the road leading out of the neighborhood. No umbrella, no destination. The rain was cold, but somehow I felt lighter. After months of suspicion, fear, and silence, finally, the truth had been spoken. Not through shouting, but through the quiet of a man too tired to hate. I rented a small apartment near downtown Austin. Simple, quiet, 2 rooms. No one knew where I was, except Rachel. I needed time, for myself, for my children, for whatever was left of me after the storm. In the mornings, I still went to work as usual. Colleagues greeted me, clients shook my hand, business went on. But inside, I felt hollow, like a body moving out of habit. Whenever I saw Andrew walk into the office, his head lowered, unable to meet my eyes. I didn't feel anger. I felt emptiness. The kind that leaves no room for hatred, only silence after emotion has died. A week later, I signed the divorce papers. No drama, no shouting. Clara didn't resist, didn't ask for forgiveness. We sat across from each other in the lawyer's office and signed the documents that ended more than 20 years of marriage. When the pen touched the paper, I realized my hands weren't trembling anymore. Maybe when pain reaches its limit, all that remains is calm. Rachel visited often. She didn't ask questions, just sat with me, sometimes bringing coffee or pie. Ethan avoided me for a while. He wasn't ready to understand. I didn't blame him. I simply told Rachel, "Don't hate your mother. Let the past stay where it belongs." She nodded, tears silently falling. Every night I sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer over the lake. Sometimes I thought of Clara, not with anger, but with a quiet sadness. We truly loved each other once. Maybe somewhere between work, duty, and all those unnoticed distances, we lost each other. I started writing again, not in the old notebook filled with evidence, but in a new one, clean, white. I wrote down what I'd learned through it all. That no happiness lasts if you stop nurturing it. That truth, no matter how painful, is the only thing that can save a man's soul from breaking completely. I don't know what the future holds. But that night, when the wind over the lake grew still and the rain finally stopped, I knew. The storm had passed, and though battered, I was still standing. Time moved slowly, as if life itself was learning to walk beside me again. The first months after the divorce were heavy. I'd wake up at night, listening to the clock ticking in the empty apartment, reminding myself, everything has changed. No more Clara's laughter in the kitchen, no more smell of her morning coffee, no more of the small habits that used to be the rhythm of my life. But over time, I realized silence wasn't frightening anymore. It was no longer the void of loss, but the space for rebirth. I began running every morning around Barton Lake, at first only for a few minutes, then longer, farther. The chill of the wind brushing my face reminded me that I was still alive. Each step felt like a small declaration. I was no longer trapped by old pain. One day, Rachel visited, carrying a box of apple pie. "Dad," she said softly, "Mom's teaching again. She asked if you're doing okay." I paused before answering, "I'm fine. Tell her thank you." Rachel studied me for a moment, her eyes gentle. "You're not angry at her anymore, are you?" I smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart. Anger keeps you tied to the past. I'm choosing to move forward." That night I opened my new notebook, the one I started after leaving home, and wrote another line. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means being strong enough not to let pain control your life anymore. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a business seminar. They wanted me to talk about recovery after personal crisis. At first, I refused. I didn't think my story was worth sharing. But then I remembered that rainy night when I walked out of my home empty-handed and broken-hearted. If I could rise from that, maybe my story could help someone else rise too. So I said yes. On stage, I spoke plainly. No sugarcoating, no hiding. I talked about losing trust, about the silent kind of pain, and about finding myself again through facing the truth. When I finished, the room was silent for a few seconds before applause filled the air. A middle-aged woman came up to me, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "I'm going through the same thing, and now I know I can survive it." That night, back at my apartment, I sat by the window, watching the city lights reflect on the lake. And in that quiet moment, I understood. The light had never left. I just kept my eyes closed too long to see it. Life may break apart, but it never loses its ability to heal. I smiled softly, took a sip of coffee, and wrote the final line in my notebook. No one escapes the dark, but everyone can choose to walk toward the light. Looking back on my journey, I've realized something. Not every storm comes to destroy. Some storms come only to show you who you really are when everything else is gone. I lost a marriage, but I found myself again. I learned that in the darkness of betrayal, hatred only pulls you deeper. Only truth and forgiveness can lead you out of that place. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means letting go of the pain to finally find peace inside. If you're walking through your own dark days, I want you to know this. No night lasts forever. The light is always there, waiting for you to be brave enough to look toward it. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's possible. Thank you for listening to my story until the very end. If somewhere in this journey you saw a reflection of yourself, leave a comment below. Sometimes the moment you share your story is the very moment you start stepping out of the dark. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, then walk with me through more stories of truth, healing, and light. My name is Michael, and I've learned that, no matter how broken life becomes, you can always begin again, as long as you keep walking toward the light.